Out in the Carolina backwoods, in a forgotten little corner of the South, the town of Scarlet Hollow has lost its matriarch. A bitter old woman we never knew, our Aunt Pearl Ann. There was a schism in the family long ago, and our mother left town. She too has since shrugged off this mortal coil, winnowing the family down to just two. Us and our cousin Tabitha. We've never met her either, but it didn't seem right to leave our only remaining relative to handle the funeral all on her own. So here we are, on a bus, riding God knows how many miles out to what locals call the holler. The stranger next to us will not shut up. He's annoying at first. We've been tuning him out for hours. But suddenly, casually, he says something a little disturbing. Is he going to hurt somebody? Scarlet Hollow launched in 2019, with episodic releases every couple of years since then. It's by Black Tabby Games, who you may know as the developers of Slay the Princess. If you haven't heard, Slay the Princess was a short, experimental deconstruction of the visual novel format, brought to life by expressive art that far outdid most of the works it was riffing on, in quality and especially in quantity. But really, you can look at it as simply a warm-up for the main event. I do not like visual novels. You might, and that's okay, and yes, I know there are exceptions, and I do like some of those, so please just stick with me for a second. In any game where the writing is more than just a shallow excuse for the puzzles or the action, good writing is a key part, I would argue the most important part, of the experience. Good writing got me to put dozens and dozens of hours into Void Stranger, a game I would have otherwise been bored to tears by. Good writing doesn't just mean fancy words. The medium is the message. Every part of the experience, from the music to the character designs to even the menus, is a part of that package. When I say writing, yes, I mean the script, but I also mean the way that the interactive multimedia experience allows you to engage with that script. A lot of visual novels, whatever you may think of their writing, fail to take advantage of the medium. Even some of the best examples trade the ease and simplicity of pure text for a few anime girl pings, some forgettable music, and maybe a story with a couple of different routes. The written word, no less important here because the paucity of visual assets means that the text must constantly slog through dry exposition rather than describing a scene via imagery or gameplay, gets crammed into the bottom fifth of the screen, and you're forced to button mash through it, one line at a time. I love Steins Gate, but when the characters get into a loop of constantly repeating things back to each other, or when Okabe starts describing actions that ought to be obvious from the images, it makes me want to stick my head right into a Kerr black hole. This is not a problem for Scarlet Hollow. For one, it has more art than I have ever seen in a visual novel. Every scene is richly detailed, with bespoke character drawings and beautifully detailed backgrounds. From the moment we arrive at the sprawling ruin of our family estate, we're treated as scene after scene that we can just get lost in. Right away, we discover that something isn't quite right here in the holler. A meet-cute with a local cryptid hunter turns into a nightmare in the woods. Something, or someone, is following us. There's a darkness beneath this town, and we suspect our cousin Tabitha knows more about it than she's willing to let on. Scarlet Hollow is a gothic horror epic, conjuring the ghosts of the Old South the way Night in the Woods captured the hopeless decay of the Rust Belt. Like 2017's Night in the Woods, it contrasts the bleakness of its themes with vibrant, colorful characters who take on new and dynamic contexts as you weave your way through a story with more branches than the Scarlet family tree. That is, before our relatives all tragically died under suspicious circumstances. But this isn't Night in the Woods. Narratively, in scope and scale, it is much bigger. We're not filling the shoes of a local girl failure, we're whoever we want to be, picking two of a wide set of special abilities and defining who exactly we are in this world besides just Tabitha's cousin. Our decisions have major repercussions. People will live or die, will find friends and lovers, and almost invariably leave someone alienated. We can't save them all, as the introduction warns, but on 3 subsequent playthroughs, I saw dramatically different outcomes that continued to matter as the story wore on. We don't know these people, we don't know this town, and our big city notions can do a lot of harm to what turns out to be a surprisingly fragile community. Take Tabitha, for example. She's inherited the Scarlet Mining Company from her late mother, a position that seems like it would bring her a substantial amount of wealth and power. The mines are the economic lifeblood of this town, and without them, it would quickly wither and die. With whispers of a strike brewing, our first impulse might be to throw in with the miners and convince her to make concessions, especially as Tabby's standoffishness and reclusive attitude aren't doing her any favors. But spending any time with her quickly reveals that there doesn't actually seem to be much money left in the family business. She spends her days in a tiny office, struggling to do a job that clearly ought to be handled by a team. The family manor lies in dripping squalor. She drives a car that still has a tape deck. She's not hoarding wealth. She's struggling to keep the company and the town it supports above water. Does that automatically make her right? No. Perhaps a workers' co-op could manage the mine better than a 20-something woman who lives entirely on off-brand macaroni and cheese. Or maybe she's ferreting money away somewhere, ready to cash out when the operation finally fails. Maybe the stress of knowing the livelihood of hundreds of people rests on her shoulders is not a good enough excuse for long hours and poor wages. Personally, I was drawn to Tabitha immediately due to her down-to-earth appearance and amusingly salty brand of neurodivergence. How well you get on with Tabitha, or anyone else for that matter, is actually pretty complex. The game isn't a series of false choices, nor is it simple branching paths. It's a complex web built by establishing identities and relationships with the people you meet. Those relationships are key. In life, we are often defined by the way people react to us, but too many games reduce complex social dynamics to a simple like/dislike system. Scarlet Hollow improves upon this by adding a qualitative metric. What is the nature of our relationship to a given person? Do they take us seriously? Do they respect us? Do they think we're a lot of fun? To lean on Tabitha as an example again, she is immediately curt to the point of rudeness, seemingly having no time for or interest in bonding with her last remaining relative. How we respond to that attitude shapes her opinion of us. If we are unfazed and continually make jokes, she'll be less bothered by our razzing her in the future, but we'll have a harder time accepting when we're being genuinely kind. If we take it in stride and respect her desire for a quiet car ride, she'll appreciate that we showed some empathy and understanding during a difficult time, and in the future will be more likely to extend the same courtesy to us. And if we click all the nice options just to try to make her happy, she'll see us as a doormat that she can walk all over. This gets really complex under the hood, but in practice it's quite smooth. Were this poorly executed, it would lead to characters that felt fickle and hard to please. Instead, it does the opposite. They come across as consistent and emotionally aware, and their reactions make you feel like you actually have a place in their world, rather than just filling the usual role of a faceless self-insert in somebody else's story. What's more, the abilities you choose play into these perceptions, especially if you lean on their dialogue options. If you choose the hot trait, for instance, you'll have a much easier time smooth-talking people and making friends, but in at least one instance, Tabitha found my attitude a bit vapid. If you let on that your abilities are more on the supernatural side, say with Mystic or Talks to Animals, several characters will treat you with awe and even a little fear. It's a lot of fun coming up with a character in your head and then seeing the world really respond to who you've decided to be. Currently, there are 4 chapters, with another 2 planned. As with Telltale's Walking Dead games, these are interconnected sequential stories which also work as standalone sections. It's often tempting to say, oh, I'll just wait for the final version to come out. But what's currently on offer is several hours of character-driven intrigue and horror that wraps up, for now, in a fairly satisfying place. For romance, if that's your thing, there are 8 characters to get close to, some of which have multiple romance routes. They run the gamut from younger to older, and, being a pretty diverse cast, there's probably something here for everyone. Yes, that includes the freaks. And, while we can pick our gender, the characters' preferences only cover traits and actions, and most of them are a bit flexible even then, so don't worry about missing out because you clicked female or anything. Scarlet Hollow is listed at the time of this writing for $24.99 USD on Steam, itch.io, GOG, and probably a few other places. It is a wonderful experience, and I highly recommend it. Second in today's rundown is a game that I think isn't going to be for everybody, but it does offer some experiences you will not get anywhere else. Late Night Games' cyberpunkdreams.
Man, it's so hard being a pimp. They keep hating on me. I don't know why. Like, I am just keeping to my business. But nobody respects me. Is there any way to quit pimping?
The wind scours the Ohio Badlands like it's looking for something, kicking up a biting dust that scores pits into the windshields and paint jobs lined up at the border crossing. On one side, hostile scrubland, 230 meters of no man's land, and then a shantytown, huddling against the walled city like a fungal infection. Despite the barbed wire, the minefields, and the miles of fortified wall, the only thing that really stands between us and the city of 24 million is Tower Group, a privatized police force. Ostensibly, these masked goons are here to keep a lid on things, bust up riots, keep crime from spreading to the corporate sleepwalkers in their policed zones. But that ain't how it really goes down. Sure, they screen new arrivals, check them for contraband, keep the worst of the Badlands out. But anyone out there will tell you that Tower's contract really hinges on just one thing: making sure mutants don't make it into the city. See, some people are just born different. Could be the chemical weapons, the pollution, or maybe it's the rogue nanites. Someone's designer job breaching containment and running amok, changing babies in the womb so they all come out wrong. Just one more reason not to bring a kid into this rotten world. We don't remember much. Bits and pieces. We're here to do something, some kind of mission, but we don't know for whom or why we agreed. What we can say is that the job required a near total memory wipe. Sounds corporate, but we're in no position to guess. First, we'll need to figure out who we are. Cyberpunk Dreams is an especially immersive role-playing experience. A life sim, but not just that. It's about complex, interconnected systems, plots, subplots, and side stories that keep this from turning into a cyberpunk-themed card puzzle game. So now what? We're stuck out in the border town, and there are way too many buttons. At its core, the mechanics of this game are a rat's nest of different resources we have to manage. We have a limited number of actions, the clock is ticking, we're broke, we're getting hungry, we're lonely, we're stressed. There are just so many buttons. Because our actions are limited by the passage of real time, we're going to want to use them efficiently. This means coming up with a goal and figuring out how to work toward it. Hitting the Border Town life deck, we can draw 3 event cards. These offer opportunities to spend and earn resources, to make skill checks, increasing our skills in the process, all presented as little vignettes, micro-stories that add up to create a narrative. This kind of gameplay may be familiar to fans of Fallen London, and indeed, Cyberpunk Dreams owes a lot to that game. But you'd be mistaken in thinking that it's just the same steampunk game in a cyberpunk skin, or comparing it to a resource manager like Cultist Simulator. There's something very different about Cyberpunk Dreams, though it takes a little while to figure out just what. The first few hours of gameplay take place in this sort of tutorialized version of the border town. Our primary goal is to figure out a way into the city. If we scrape together $100, we can buy a phony border pass and walk right in, provided we're not a mutant, which is something we actually get to decide as we go along. Being a mutant comes with a lot of advantages and drawbacks, and unique roleplay experiences, but there's also a standing shoot-on-sight policy. Playing as a mutant means always looking over your shoulder, never knowing if you can trust the people around you. We're also given some of the most comprehensive gender options I've ever seen in a video game. We're asked first to define our legal gender, then later, privately, we recall our sex assigned at birth. From there, we can decide how we feel about all of this, how much of a thing it has to be. This all plugs into a set of systems involving our anatomy, our day-to-day presentation, our clothing, and eventually even surgery, if we want it. These are things our contacts and romantic partners might have opinions about, for better or worse. What's wild to me is that the game isn't really focused on queerness. It's there, certainly, but it's not a major theme. The developer just noticed that it would be pretty simple to implement and outdid just about every other RPG I can think of. But it's only a thing if you want it to be a thing. For this character, we'll go with a cisgender female, nothing too fancy, and decide that we are indeed a mutant. A mutant with serpentine chimerism, an insatiable appetite, skin that bioluminesces everywhere but our hands and head, fast healing, and mental camouflage, a set of innate behaviors and pheromones which helps people forget about us, whether we want them to or not. There are a lot of these, and some of them, like vampirism, completely change the game and much of its underpinning story. Past the tutorial, once we found an illicit route into the city, we set up shop as a small-time hustler in the Cincinnati slums. Choosing 2 out of 4 temperaments, Saint, Fighter, Trickster, and Watcher, we land on Saint and Trickster. Later, we'll get to further define these temperaments. For this character, sainthood is about guilt, making up for some past transgression, and being a trickster means survival at any cost. We decide that we are a bad person trying to be better, with mixed success, of course. Over time, we build familiarity with different areas of the city, unlocking new locations that offer all kinds of useful services. We progress from a 2-bit thief to a drug dealer. We work construction as a day job. By night, we take on some work as a hired gun, a driver, whatever we can get to make ends meet. These jobs are not likely to go smoothly, but that's the fun part. Failure in cyberpunk dreams often opens just as many doors as success, and often in unexpected ways. There are characters, entire stories you'll only see when you're in the darkest, most miserable depths of your journey. Speaking of dark, it's about here that I should advise that Cyberpunk Dreams is not for the faint of heart. To a certain extent, the game adjusts its content according to your preferences. When defining your character's sexuality, you can decide to be ace to take that whole system off the table. Choosing to turn away or look closer at certain scenes adjusts two traits: your appetites for sex and violence. These determine whether and how often certain events pop up, and adjust the level of explicit detail in some of the narration. But no matter what you do, there are gratuitous, even exploitative overtones of sex and violence, often at the same time throughout the game. At times, it makes even the most gruesome moments in Cyberpunk 2077 appear tame by comparison. When I reviewed Fear and Hunger, I spoke at length about how horror allows us to engage with traumatic topics in a controlled environment, to compartmentalize and examine the things that make us and our society tick, and that a puritanical knee-jerk reaction to objectionable content is an ignorant, or maybe more charitably, a misguided impulse. While I still believe that, I think the content here is several shades darker, which bears mentioning. Though that may be because the written word is a much more intimate medium. Cyberpunk Dreams is steeped in the ultraviolence and splatterpunk of the 1980s. These movements were a reaction to the staunch, callous conservatism of their day, to the moral panic over drugs, to the rising tide of police brutality and global conflict. Remember when RoboCop shot that dude in the dick? Today's world is facing some similarly dark times, and sometimes it seems like all we can do is watch. Cyberpunk Dreams revels in the spectacle of a rotten world, and in some ways feels more true to the genre's pulpy roots than the more sanitized modern offerings. Much of the game, especially its first major arc, is concerned with the sex trade, which is depicted in an entirely monstrous light, its human product used up and destroyed in a constant bloody churn. While you can do a good deed here or there if you like, or plenty of bad ones, it is ultimately a problem that you can't fix. A bitter meditation on that sinking feeling we get when we read the news, whether on purpose or because nowadays it's something you just can't get away from. If the writing was just cheap exploitation, I don't think I'd be interested. It's been a long time since I was a teenager, and life tends to dull one's edge. There are actually a few side stories early on that went a bit far for my tastes. These I understand to be older content, maybe a little out of step with the tone of some of the newer stuff. What kept me interested was the quality of the prose, largely done by the game's lead designer, Rob Chant, who looks kind of like the Postal Dude. Despite the incredible cruelty and over-the-top violence of the setting, Rob keeps the reader tethered with fascinating characters and stories that rarely sit still. None of these people, with the exception of Irene, really give a damn about keeping the reader happy. They are first and foremost going to be themselves. Out of all the bunch, I think my favorite is Anne. Anne's a sex worker who you meet very early on, and despite the brutality inherent to the business in the setting, she likes what she does, and she's very good at it. Not that our character here would know. Anne is straight, and more than that, she's a little homophobic, or at least lesbophobic. She's one of those women who doesn't have any female friends. We've all known the type. She lies, she keeps secrets, and she uses people. She borrows money off of me and then blows it all partying. I would kill and or die for her. Despite her many flaws, she's someone who tries to be kind in a world where that's often impossible. She genuinely likes her clients. If she's duplicitous, it's because she's trying to survive. Most of all, she reminds me so much of a few different people I've known throughout my life. Not everyone's so down to earth, of course. Mavis here is basically a female Anton Chigurh, but at least she's not homophobic. The game has a lot of beautiful illustration, with artist Luke Mulver's work smearing guns, girls, and grime across the screen. It's supported by a slick soundtrack from a variety of artists, grungy electronic ambiance that dynamically changes to suit the scene, whether it's a chase, sunrise out in the desert, or the darkest corners of the city. Most people who encounter the game, and probably many of you watching the video, immediately bristle at the action point system. Look, I get it. I was like you once. Time-gated action points are often used by predatory free-to-play games to hide the fun behind a paywall. They set up the anticipation that baits the free-to-play trap. You are right to be suspicious. Free-to-play games are rarely worth your time, and even more rarely worth your money. But please believe me when I say that that is not what is happening here. See, Cyberpunk Dreams is free, and I don't mean free in the way where all the good stuff is paywalled. I mean free like it's free. And while you can pay for extra actions, you'll quickly find that this has dramatically diminishing returns. The game is a life simulator, meant to be played in small bursts over days and weeks and even months of real time. Think of it like an ultra-violent Animal Crossing. You pop in, do the rounds, check on your contacts, maybe sling some crack, maybe get a little story progression. Sometimes it's more than a little. But it's meant to leave you with something to mull over and look forward to tomorrow. By default, you have a maximum of 50 action points and are awarded another every 10 minutes. If you pay for a subscription, which is something like $5 US for a month's time, the cap is raised to 75 and the refresh rate lowered to 8 minutes. I'd argue that if you find you're really enjoying the game, dropping 10 or 15 bucks on it for a few months subscription is a fair and economical way to show your appreciation and get something out of it. This is a small team you're supporting, not Tencent. But even if you don't, most of the time, there isn't really more than 100 actions worth of things to do in a day. Sure, you can grind longer, I guess, but storylines take real life time to progress or even unlock in the first place. So blowing a bunch of cash on extra actions every day would usually just result in you outrunning the content. The action points are there to lend structure to the experience, not to keep you away from the fun. On top of that, Cyberpunk Dreams is very generous with its free actions. Once a week you get a free binge, which is a huge pile of action points all at once. And you also get a weekly delivery of consumables called breathers, which restore action points. There are things you can do in the game that refund even more action points, and if you have a bit of in-game money, it's possible to make more advanced types of breathers that wind up totaling out to many more actions than you'd normally get. So the whole thing winds up just being another part of the gameplay. How do you maximize what you can do in a day? My current character is a bit over 3 months old. The rate of new content and storylines has certainly slowed down by this point, but I've enjoyed my time in Cincinnati so much that I went ahead and bought 2 ebooks for sale on the game's Steam page and enjoyed them immensely. I suspect it will be some time before I put this game down, and it's one I'll come back to often as new updates are constantly being released. There are certainly some characters and storylines I'm very eager to see followed up on. Third on the list is something far more tame, but still firmly in the dark romance genre. I'm talking about a cute little vampire game called Cabernet. Cabernet begins with a funeral, our funeral. We are, or were, Dr. Elizaveta Morozova. Our father offers a eulogy over what he believes to be our final resting place, telling us a bit about ourselves and offering us a chance to choose our starting skills: art, literature, medicine, and politics. Not long after, we awaken in a dark cellar, our chemise and hair in disarray. After making an uncertain deal with a mysterious entity, we are freed from our cell and stumble into some sort of a masquerade party. These are vampires, and that is Brian David Gilbert.
Miss, are you all right?
Mind your own business, Petya. It's rude to stare at a lady.
Sorry.
BDG is not a vampire. Following the introduction, which goes about as well as you might expect, we're turned over to our sire, Dr. Volkov. As you might have guessed, we've become a vampire, though our fellow bloodsuckers are reluctant to explain exactly how it all happened. In life, we treated the sick, and as it turns out, we are charged with doing the same in death. Though our reluctant mentor, the Hussar, explains that we are to handle some intrigue on the side for Countess Orlova, who runs the vampiric underworld in these parts. Every vampire game that has ever been made has had bad combat. Cabernet gets around this by not having any. It makes perfect sense. Lisa was a normal 19th century woman until a few days ago, and while vampires have great power, she's the youngest and weakest out of any of them. She has no business getting into fisticuffs, not in that dress. We're given a calendar. Each night has 4 phases. Time generally passes whenever we hit a major story beat, but we also have work we need to be doing for Dr. Volkov, as well as books to read to raise our skills. Add to that the fact that our blood reserves run a little drier each time we wake, our funds are limited, and we've got something of a scheduling puzzle on our hands. It's not quite as restrictive as it sounds. Casual is a loaded word in this context, especially for a narrative game about a lady vampire with a UI that just screams girl game, but Cabernet is not out to give you a hard time. You likely won't have a perfect run on your first playthrough, but it's probably best if you don't try anyway. Lisa is a fledgling in a world she doesn't understand. It's only natural to make an oopsie or two. Vampires, as it turns out, aren't all as bad as they seem, but the nature of the hunt is that people are going to get hurt. Our abilities give us the power to interfere with the lives of mortals, but whether our spying, manipulation, and outright control work to their benefit or our own is always in question. Early on, we are given the opportunity to hypnotize an old alcoholic into giving up drinking. Surely that's for his benefit, but was it right to make that choice for him? And why do our best intentions so often go awry? It's very easy to compare Cabernet to the world of Vampire the Masquerade. but with its character-focused stories and subdued tone, it's much closer to the far superior though now abandoned Vampire the Requiem, which is an alternate setting and system that I'll have to talk about someday. Structurally, the game works as a sort of short story anthology revolving around Lisa and this dreary little town she inhabits. Each vignette gives us the chance to develop our relationships, skills, and morality along fairly typical RPG lines. There's certainly nothing new here. It's just a charming, stripped-down adventure game that delivers on the vampiric fantasy without any of the dreadful mechanical baggage that plagues the children of the night like some long-forgotten curse of Cain. And I found that's exactly what I wanted. Other than Night Road, there just aren't many games that give you the opportunity to roleplay this particular stripe of genre fiction without a lot of stuff that just sucks to deal with piled on top of it. Cabernet is like trying vanilla ice cream for the first time after a lifetime of questionable Ben & Jerry's flavors. The visuals call to mind mid-19th century woodcuts or paper dolls, or a children's picture book gone horribly wrong. Lisa, beautiful in her imperial garb, slowly hollows out as the nights pass without feeding. It adds a subtle sense of urgency. The first time I bit someone, it was out of desperation and at a very bad time. But somehow, this animation made it all okay. The word cozy is overused, but it's certainly appropriate here, despite everything. Content-wise, this is the tamest of today's outings. There's plenty of blood, of course, and some death and deceit besides, but as far as sex goes, things are appropriately prim and proper for the era. Cabernet is mostly content to lean on metaphors and subtle glances. Our fourth and final game in this review tetralogy is Misericord. Misericord is one of those experiences I am hesitant to call a game. It's a visual novel in the purest sense of the word, essentially an animated comic book told in first-person perspective. It's a work of historical fiction set in the year 1482. We are Hedwig, an anchoress, that is, a sort of religious hermit, recruited by the Mother Superior of our abbey to solve a murder which may be connected to a broader conspiracy between warring factions of English royalty. While the premise and music immediately grabbed me, I will admit that for the first 10 or 20 minutes, I had my doubts. If I was not already a fan of artist and developer ZC's work, I might not have lasted that long. See, Hedwig, as I've mentioned, is an anchoress, meaning that it has been many years since she saw a human face. Our introduction begins with a peek into the deadly conspiracy. Two men and a man are discussing a plot to kill the king. We then jump to an extended conversation between Hedwig and one of the sisters in the abbey, done through a little hole in the wall. Both of these scenes lack portraits, and that only makes sense. Hedwig never saw her friend, and revealing the identities of the two men could unravel our mystery all too soon. But as I said, this is a visual medium. It's certainly a purposeful choice, but it's a lot of text to click through before we have any way to ground ourselves in the setting. Luckily, this all changes the moment our cell door opens. Nuns wear habits, or most of them did up until the 1960s, and even if the art had color, we'd still be looking at a bunch of people wearing the same black and white penguin costume. This is where ZC really gets the chance to put their talent as an illustrator on display. These portraits ooze character. You immediately get a sense for who these women are, which is going to be important because one of them may know more than she's letting on about the murder we're investigating. Whatever reservations I have about visual novels as a format evaporated the moment these little weirdos began to brighten my screen. What follows is a foray into the proverbial lion's den. Surely the culprit isn't going to mistake our change of occupation for mere coincidence, and even the innocent have their secrets and grudges to keep. The snappy dialogue and colorful prose get some help from a nice-looking UI that mostly helps keep us oriented as we wander the shadowed halls from matins to midnight. Misericord is another work in progress, with 2 volumes released so far. Both clock in at about 10 hours and are well worth your time if you like the Middle Ages, murder mysteries, or women. Thanks so much for dropping in. I've got another deep dive in the works, and I have the feeling that the Fear and Hunger update is coming soon, so I'm gonna have to do something about that. I'm also still hard at work on Cataclysm: The Last Generation. If you'd like to support the channel or just check out what else I'm doing, please consider subscribing or heading over to the Patreon. See you soon!